Hi DF, why do you think some developers of AAA cross-platform games are content with the resolution dropping as low as 720p on PS5 and Xbox Series X using DRS that was considered a target for an Xbox 360 that was released 18 years ago? In 2024, the year of our Lord 2024, shouldn't developers be targeting a minimum of 1440p as an example for the PS5 and Series X so we don't get the blurry mess we've been seeing in some games? I say leave the high-end effects like ray tracing for high-end PCs and give console players games that don't drop to sub 30 FPS, preferably 60, with resolutions dropping below 900p. Oliver, there is a problem here, isn't there? Because we're seeing a lot of games, high-profile games, that are sort of delivering really poor, low pixel counts. And I think the point is that we don't have the upscaling technology to mitigate that.
Yes, there certainly is a point to that. And I would say that by and large, the 30 FPS modes in current generation console titles on PS5 and Series X are generally hitting internal resolutions of like, if not 1440p, not much below it, even in games like Alan Wake 2 that are really demanding. So I think that it's not as much of a problem for those 30 FPS modes. But I wouldn't want to set hard and fast rules for a few reasons, I think. First of all, consoles targeting more advanced visuals at lower resolutions gives the PC versions more headroom to improve image quality and features, right? That's a big deal. So a game like Avatar can ship on consoles with essentially a PC level of features, but with reduced image quality, and the PC can deliver high resolution ray tracing, much better image quality. That also greatly simplifies cross-platform development if all games are being made to the same feature set, and allows the console version to look, in broad strokes, very similar to a high-end PC build. And I would also say, and maybe this is an area where I won't get agreement necessarily from the other people on this panel, but I think FSR2 is a good solution and can be employed to very good effect depending on the game, even at more extreme scales. Like I looked at the Series S version of Redfall a few months ago at 60 FPS, and it's basically 720p at a 1440p output roughly. But because the game has a lower detail art style, is in the first person, doesn't have a whole lot of specular, and is targeting a pretty high frame rate, it looks pretty good. It ends up looking like a 1440p game with maybe like a little bit substandard TAA in my opinion. So I think that's one example. And then in the other example, you'd have a game like Skull and Bones, which has a very zoomed out camera, tons of particle effects, screen space stuff everywhere, trying to do like the same reconstruction, and it just totally fails. So I would be a little bit more narrow and say like in some games doing an extreme scale, like Skull and Bones, like Jedi Survivor, a lot of the time does not look good. But in other titles with maybe more limited art, with maybe a first-person perspective that are targeting high frame rates already, it might be okay. So I would really caveat it that way. But I'm probably a little bit more tolerant of image quality faults than most people. And I do want developers to be pushing out technology in a way that wouldn't really be possible with more last generation visual features at higher resolutions. So that's just my own personal inclination. And I also have a high-end PC, so I can bypass all this if I don't like it. So maybe that's my own bias, but I don't know what you guys think.
Well, I enjoyed your let them eat cake style outlook. Thoughts there?
I mean, in spite of Oliver saying I might disagree with him, or at least implying it, I do not disagree with him. I think there's a place for everything. In the description of, for example, you looked at once at, Scorn. That was FSR2, mainly 1440p, I think up to 4K.
Yeah, 1440p to 4K, yeah.
Yeah, and that one, it was like, right? It was really hard to even get a grasp of whether or not it was using FSR2, mainly due to the art style. It was really hard to find the tells, in spite of, high resolution, everything like that. But still, there's tells, but it was even hard to find because of the art style. And I think art style and game type can dramatically change the whatever the image quality of the game is trying to achieve with upscaling. So yeah, I agree with that. And I think I also agree with the fact that it is about leaving higher room for that PC version, as well as simplifying development where you can just drop the res and then kind of deal with it another way. But at the same time, I think this is a little bit settings, a little expectations management would really help console players here, where honestly, if you are targeting a next gen game that doesn't have cross gen to it, the chance of it being ultra high resolution in a 60 FPS mode, it's just not there, because you're dealing with GPUs like in the PS5's case that are like upper like that mid-range 5700 XT from like 2020, and we're now in 2024. So like I wouldn't expect also like the RTX 2070 Super to be really have incredible image quality even with DLSS in a game that's targeting 60 FPS these days. I mean, it'll be better than something with FSR 2, but still, I just like drop my expectations as soon as I know what level of hardware doing with it. And I think that would help console players a bit. I think, though, it's fine to demand games that do not have modes like this, and you demand them by not buying them. And you just show the developer that you don't want that, you don't want the next-gen features at low frame rates, low FPS. I can't say it again. Low resolution. And instead, buy something simpler. Buy a AA game which runs at like near 4K, or Pentiment runs at 4K 120. Buy that game. That's a really good game. So I think it's hard to put these clear rules down for developers, and they didn't even exist in the Xbox 360 generation. Like games didn't even run at 30 there. They ran sometimes at 720p, but they often did not, especially in the PS3's case. So,
yeah. I'd also say that, like, if you go back to the 360 era, you go back to the earlier eras, certainly of consoles, like the super smooth, high fidelity image that we get out of a modern console, even relatively speaking, that's a pretty new phenomenon. I mean, I remember atrocious image quality nowadays, judged by today's standards, in almost every single 360 or PS3 game, realistically. So, right. I mean, if we're talking about temporal techniques, even with FSR2, and I know FSR2 isn't perfect, but just go back to those consoles, and we've come a long way in terms of image quality. So if you kind of reset your expectations, that'd be my suggestion for console players. Reset your expectations a little bit and kind of accept it, and understand that that's just the way that things, I think they realistically probably have to be.
Yeah, I think fundamentally developers are doing the best job they can. And also, going back to the Xbox 360 era, there were a lot of sub-HD games, like Alan Wake 2 was 544p, albeit with 4x LSAA. So, yeah, it is down to the sort of the developers to, trust the developer to produce the best choice overall. But with that said, I think a lot of this is because of the demand for 60 FPS performance modes, which I think Oliver was alluding to there. There's a lot of outrage if a game doesn't support 60 FPS. So, if your design target was originally 30 FPS, where do you go? There's only one route forward, and that is to drop resolution. And then it becomes a case of, well, how do you upscale? How do you get a decent presentation on a modern living room display? And unfortunately, the only real tool that is available to developers, there's obviously Epic TSR, which would only be available for Unreal Engine games. And then there's FSR2, which works on anything. FSR2 is interesting because obviously it is open source. But at the same time, I do think, this demand for 60 FPS performance modes is driving this, this ultra low resolution stuff, and it's not great. But then again, you get stuff like Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, where 30 FPS mode actually looks really, really great. You do have a 60 FPS mode which can go as low as 720p, and image quality isn't quite as good, or anywhere near as good if we're being realistic about it. But a lot of people really like that 60 FPS gameplay, so it is, and it is dynamic. So, it's all about choice, really, in that scenario. And, I think there is a lot of pressure being put on developers there. One bit of content which, has just struck me as a really great idea, I'll just put it out there. I would really love to see an in-depth analysis on how DLSS Ultra Performance Mode to 4K actually bears up on a living room display. Because I think it would actually work okay for most people, and would probably solve a lot of these problems that we're seeing with the likes of Jedi Survivor and Skull and Bones.
I agree.
Yeah, I think we should look into that. We should put that on the back burner, as they say, Alex.
Yeah, I'll do it. It's fun.
Yeah, I think any of us could do that, because it's really interesting, and we could limit ourselves to, like, I don't know. What would a current generation equivalent be? I guess it would be the 4060, really. Or 3060 is a bit below PS5 standards. But 4060 could be an interesting test for that, it would certainly do it. We just have to be mindful of the memory constraint.
Yeah, that is always the thing with that GPU. Like, man, it could be this wonderful GPU.
Could
this
be.
8 gigs.
4060 is really surprising me based on the 6700 PS5 video I did. It seemed to consistently outperform the PlayStation 5 in the tests that we had, but the memory is a bit of an issue.